Shalom. I am Rabbi Michael Panitz of Temple Israel of Norfolk, and at this moment I'm speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel. However, in just a moment, you're going to hear a sermon that I preached in a neighboring congregation. The congregation is Christ and St. Luke's Episcopal Church of Norfolk, Virginia. For the last number of years, I've been privileged to be the rabbi in residence at this distinguished church. I teach there, and periodically I preach there. When doing so, I am often asked to deliver a discourse on biblical subjects and to offer biblical theology in action. And it is indeed a privilege to have a community of the faithful who want to hear those words. So what you're about to hear was preached from the pulpit of Christ and St. Luke's Church on Sunday, November 14th. And its theme, as you will soon hear, touches upon questions of how do we incorporate religion into our American identity in a way that allows us to celebrate our diversity. And so I offer it to you now as part of a Thanksgiving blessing. Happy holidays. Standing in the pulpit of this magnificent space, I have in mind two biblical verses that frame for me the experience of this moment. The first is from the Psalms of David, Psalm number 145. Dor ledor yishabach ma'asecha, ugvurotecha yagidu. One generation shall laud thy works to another, and shall declare thy mighty acts, one generation to another. Today is the first opportunity open to me to share a homily with you since the retirement of our esteemed Reverend Wynne Lewis. It is, frankly, strange for me to be here without the comforting presence of that dear friend and colleague. But the Bible assures us that the message, more than the messenger, is what endures. I'm confident that Wynne, like Father Abraham, at the beginning of our shared history, is continuing on the stages of his journey toward the Promised Land, and that God is blessing him on his journey. The second verse is from the Song of Hannah. In English, we call it Hannah. Hannah is a Hebrew name, means the gracious one. We read this verse in our worship this morning. In gratitude for the blessing of a son, by which God filled her life and transformed her mourning into rejoicing, Hannah reflected on the changing fortunes in life. She prayed, "The bows of the mighty are broken, and the faltering are girded with strength." The mighty lose their strength, the faltering gain their strength. Now there's a pitfall here. It's easy for us to misconstrue what Hannah is saying. And the reason why it's easy for us to misinterpret her words is that we are children of Greek and Roman antiquity and Renaissance ways of thinking. Westerners might well understand Hannah's words using the Italian Renaissance image of the Wheel of Fortune. Yes, long before it was a game show, the Wheel of Fortune was a staple of Western intellectual thought. If you are on the top of the world today, you're apt to have a great fall. And conversely, if you're all the way down, there's nowhere to go but up. It's an attractive meme, but it's not, in fact, the way to understand Hannah's words. After all, she expresses biblical consciousness, not the paganism of Greek antiquity or the child of its old age, the Renaissance. Hannah is telling us something quite different from the mechanistic understanding of fate in the Wheel of Fortune image. Hannah is saying that God is the force that allows us to pull ourselves up from the depths. Likewise, it is God's support that allows us, from however humble a station, to confront the haughty, to confront the arrogant, to confront the scions of unearned privilege, the people who, in the words of the legendary football coach Barry Switzer, quote, are born on third base and go through life thinking they've hit a triple. God is what gives the simple foot soldiers of the civil rights movement the strength, in the words of Dr. King's I Have a Dream, to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together. You see, Hannah was a have-not in a society that prejudicially judged a woman's worth by her ability to have a son. The story of how she overcame the challenge of infertility is the story of the first chapter of the book of Samuel, the chapter preceding this morning's reading. Perhaps a very few of us here today could use a brush-up on our Bible knowledge. So I will ask the majority of you to pardon me while I briefly summarize the narrative. Hannah was one of two wives of Elkanah, a pious but somewhat clueless man in the polygamous society of early Israel. Peninnah, her co-wife, was the mother of a slew of children. Perhaps Hannah thought of them in terms similar to that used by Maggie in Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. No-neck monsters, a whole bunch of them running around. But those kids were proof positive in that society that Hannah was a failure. The obvious affection that her husband had for her could not erase that. Hannah accompanied Elkanah on the annual pilgrimage to the tabernacle of the Lord at Shiloh. In her distress, she mouthed a silent prayer. The Bible tells us only her lips were moving. The high priest in residence, Eli, misconstrued her behavior and thought that she was mumbling in a drunken state. He reprimanded her, but she corrected him, albeit in respectful and civil tones. She explained that she was distressed and depressed, not drunk. To his credit, Eli admitted that he was wrong, which is a lot better behavior than that displayed by many male chauvinists today when they are challenged by women whom they have stereotyped and put down. Eli adds his assent and his blessing to her prayers. Lo and behold, when Hannah and Elkanah return home, she is able to conceive and bear a son, whom she names Shemuel, Samuel, from the Hebrew word shama, to hear. Shemuel, God has heard. In fulfillment of the vow that she had made in the tabernacle, she presents the lad 2 or 3 years later after she had weaned him. That's how long they nursed their babies in biblical Israel. But after his weaning, she presented him to Eli as an acolyte. And that's how the prophet Shmuel began his illustrious career. Given those circumstances, it's not surprising that Hannah's prayer reflects on God as the ultimate source behind the turnarounds in fortune in our lives. Let's take this insight one step further. What gives you the courage to speak the truth to power? God. As another psalm text, Psalm 118, proclaims, Adonai li lo ira, ma ya'aseh li adam. The Lord is with me. I shall not fear. What can man do unto me? But here is an important corollary. This divinely gifted courage is not meant to make the believer arrogant. The same God consciousness is actually a source of humility. One chapter earlier in the Psalms, the poet confesses, O Lord, I am your humble servant, your servant, the child of your maidservant, and yet you have undone the cords that bound me. Now, why is this important, that God is the source both of courage and humility? And this is the point. This is the takeaway. This is the cure for a particularly contemporary sickness in our American soul. When we look at faith communities in our land, we see that some of them are so busy demonizing their opponents, political opponents, that they cloak themselves in righteousness and admit to no fault. They live in a hyper-partisan world in which their political opponents cannot possibly have any good in them, and in which they themselves have no flaws. They refuse to vote in favor of the common good, so as to deny their opponents any victory points in the perpetual contests of politics. In the more specifically religious setting, they leave their congregations over issues of red and blue, rather than breathe the same air as those who don't share their agendas. They believe that God is fully encompassed by their ballot choices. Their lack of humility and their lack of humane understanding are two sides of the same coin. The lesson of Hannah, a woman caught in the preconceptions and the social judgments of her time, and yet a woman who showed an extraordinary spiritual nature. The lesson of Hannah is a lesson for us. Be courageous, but not cantankerous. Conversely, be grateful, but not grandiose. Hannah saw no way forward, and then God opened up a path. We can aspire to the same. The gridlock of our contemporary national life is not irrevocable. But to move forward, first, we need to set aside, as Francis Bacon described them, the idols of the marketplace and the idols of the tribe. We must reconnect with the source of all blessing, from whom both courage and humility emanate. May this be God's will. Amen.
Amen.